What they did back then in the Canadian public school system, they sat you according to your academic ranking. So I began the class in the last chair. And I had an experience like the Levite and the Samaritan, or the Pharisee. Everybody in the class called me the class dummy. So I was being ridiculed in the first year of grade 2. And I said, I don't want to be in the last chair by the time grade 2 is finished. I'm going to start talking, and I'm going to practice even more assiduously how to make letters and numbers. So every few weeks we got a set of tests, and I'd move up a few chairs. Into grade 2, I was in the first chair. Now, 28 years later, when we visited my parents said, your grade 1 teacher wants to have tea with you. I said, gee, I only had her for 6 weeks, what's going on? And so, but we went over to her place, had tea. I walked into her apartment. She had a wall there with newspaper clippings on me. She literally followed my career from grade 1 all the way through to Caltech. And I said, what motivated you to do this? She said, I've never had a pupil who went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class in 1 year. I committed to follow your career. And then she started asking me a lot of questions. She had no idea I'd become a Christian. She was thrilled. Tears welled up in her eyes when she discovered I'd become a Christian. She says, I want to share something with you. By the time you entered grade 2, I prayed for you daily that you would use your science for the glory of God. And it's such a thrill for me to see that that has happened. But if it wasn't for that grade 1 teacher, I would have had to repeat grade 1. I would have been in a different set of students. I would have been with students who were, post-war, completely different culture, and I wouldn't have had the benefit of the education that I had because I did get into grade 2. So she was that good Samaritan who got me from grade 1 to grade 2 and on to my career. So almost everybody's got a story like that. Ask, and you can use that as a bridge to get a spiritual conversation going. And you say, well, how come I can look people in the eye now? I have to give credit to my wife. She saw me giving lectures where I just stared at the floor the whole time, and she said, people might respond better if you actually look at them. So I said, oh, I'll try that. So then she came to me afterwards and said, do you realize that for 2 whole hours you only looked at one person the entire time? She says, you need to look at different people throughout your talk. And I says, okay, I'll try that. Then she came back to me and says, for 2 whole hours your eyes are darting all over the room. You can't do that. So finally I did it the way she wanted, and I totally lost my place in my lecture. Now, if you want to know why my talks are so heavy on the visuals, I'm dependent on those visuals. Because if I try to make eye contact with you, I completely lose where I am in my talk, but I got the visuals here to bring me back. But I think they also help you as well. But they're predominantly for me. Okay, with that, we're going to launch into this message, what or who is the cosmic beginner? When I was a teenager, I was studying astronomy since I was 7, but it was when I was 16, I studied cosmology, looking at all the different explanations for the universe. And at that time, there was the steady state model, the oscillating universe model, the hesitating universe model, but the evidence was heavily favoring Big Bang. And with Big Bang, there's a beginner. There's a beginning to the universe, which implies a cosmic beginner, and that's what started me on looking for the cosmic beginner. And you say, well, how did you begin? Well, I started by looking at the great philosophers. Immanuel Kant is known as the father of cosmology, so I read his Critique of Pure Reason. He had a lot of mistaken ideas, particularly about space and time. Eventually, as you heard earlier, I went through the world's holy books and eventually realized the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. Now, a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you today, and by the way, I'm doing this in every talk, because I'm giving you the highlights. And like Rick says, you're not going to retain everything. You might remember 15% of what I say. I use visuals to help you capture a little bit more. Sometimes I even use object lessons, like I did in the first talk. But I always leave you with a resource that you can go over to a sufficient degree that even though you don't have a degree in astrophysics, you can share this with people and help bring them to faith in Christ. And this is my best-selling book. It's now in the 4th edition. You can get a free chapter at reasons.org/Ross. And it's basically looking at cosmic reasons to believe. Something else I got from my wife, she noticed when I was starting to give talks in a church, she says, you always have a 20-point outline. You need to reduce it to 3 points. Well, I got a 3-point outline here. Okay? Evidence from astrophysics for a God that transcends matter, energy, space, and time is basically a review. I covered some of that last time. How do we go from a deistic God to a theistic God, and a theistic God to the redeeming God of the Bible? So without looking at the Bible per se, how do we look at the evidence from the book of nature to establish that it indeed must be the God of the Bible? Now, the first book I ever read in cosmology was when I was 7 years of age. It was a book by Fred Hoyle, a book called The Nature of the Universe. And there's 2 whole chapters in that book where Fred Hoyle spews out his venom towards Christianity. He was opposed all of his life to Christianity. But he did make one concession in the book. There's a good deal of cosmology in the Bible that is a remarkable conception. And somehow I didn't forget that sentence. And when I first picked up a Bible at age 17, I began to realize Fred Hoyle is right. The Bible has got more than 10 times much to say about the origin and history of the universe as all the rest of the world's holy books combined. I'm just going to share with you briefly the basics that the Bible says about cosmology. Now, what's interesting about the Bible, it doesn't just make a single statement, it makes repeated statements. So I think you're all familiar that the Bible indeed does declare that the universe has a beginning. I gave you 2 passages in the last talk. But the truth is, there are multiple passages. This isn't a complete list, but it's a big enough list that leaves you no doubt. Multiple Bible authors declare that there is a beginning to the universe, and a beginning that includes not just matter and energy, but space and time itself. As I mentioned earlier today, we can now scientifically test and prove that these biblical assertions are indeed correct. You'll recall I talked about the space-time theorems. By the way, if you want to actually read for yourself what these space-time theorems have to say, I'd be more than happy to send you the research papers. You can ignore all the tensor calculus, just look at the last couple of paragraphs. They basically make this point, that any universe that expands has indeed a space-time beginning. So yeah, just contact me and I'll give you a link to the research paper. You can check it out for yourself. And as I mentioned last time as well, one of the more famous authors of these space-time theorems made this statement. He's still not a believer. He's getting close to becoming a believer. I'm really encouraged by what's happening amongst my peers. I've personally led several atheist astrophysicists to faith in Christ, and many of them have come to faith in Christ in the same manner I did, just going through the science and following the evidence where it leads. But yeah, he made the point that there is no escape. The evidence is now overwhelming. The universe has a beginning, and we have to face up to the philosophical consequences of that beginning, namely that it establishes that a God beyond space and time indeed must have created this universe, which means there's no longer any basis for doubting deism. And as I mentioned, the latest books being published by physicists and astronomers who claim that they're atheists, they all concede that deism is on the table. It can't be taken off the table because of the force of these space-time theorems. But the big question is God personal? So for example, Stephen Hawking, when he wrote this book, A Brief History of Time, the best-selling science book in all of history, he explicitly concedes deism, that there must be a causal agent beyond space and time. But like so many astrophysicists, he was insistent that this God was not a personal being. He even explained why. He says, if it is a personal being, then that means this personal being is evaluating my life. And because of his desire for personal autonomy, he rejected that. And that happens with a lot of atheists, physicists, and astronomers I know. The reason they're rejecting a personal God, they really don't want a personal God evaluating their life or telling them what they need to do. Now, as much as the Bible speaks about the beginning of the universe, it actually says more about the expansion of the universe. And in the English translation, it comes across that God is stretching out the heavens. But the Hebrew verb for stretching out is the verb natah, and it means the expansion of what's being described. And in these 11 passages, the verb natah shows up in all 3 Hebrew verb forms. You know, and I debated the executive director of the Skeptic Society, Michael Shermer. I've debated him 4 times on university campuses. He insists that these passages are simply figures of speech. The Bible isn't literally talking about the expansion of the universe. But the fact that the verb natah shows up in all 3 Hebrew verb forms means that indeed it's literally speaking about the ongoing expansion of the universe. And it's not just me, a 21st century, that's reading this into the text. Jewish theologians living 800, 900 years ago saw this in the text. You can go at reason.org and you'll see a paper I wrote on what the ancient theologians believed the Bible was saying about the universe. And this is something that they acknowledge. The Bible states that the universe has a beginning, a space-time beginning, and that it expands from that space-time beginning. Which explains why in the early part of the 20th century, astronomers were so disturbed about the emerging evidence that the universe is expanding. Because they knew if it was expanding, the universe had a beginning. They also knew that the Bible had predicted this thousands of years ago. And because they were so reluctant to accept the God of the Bible, they said the Big Bang has got to be wrong. Fred Hoyle, for example, is the father of the steady state theory. If you read the paper he published in 1948, he said the idea of a beginning of the universe is philosophically repugnant to me. It can't be. And so he said, here's a model which explains the universe having no beginning at all. It exists forever. And you also see that in the discovery papers or the papers inventing the oscillating universe model. By the way, the oscillating universe model comes straight from the Hindu Vedas, that the universe reincarnates. You want to know where the doctrine of reincarnation comes from? It's fundamentally based on the idea that the universe reincarnates. And I read those Hindu Vedas at age 17, and they basically say the universe goes through these repeated cycles of beginning and endings, but with a period of 4.32 billion years. And so they made a statement, the number is clearly wrong, and also the universe has an entropy measure 100 million times too great to permit any recycling of the universe. That's why I rejected Hinduism. But we now have evidence that is indisputable that the universe indeed is expanding. This is just one example from the Hubble Space Telescope. On the left, we're looking at galaxies 12 billion light years away, which means we're seeing the universe as it was 12 billion years ago. On the left, galaxies 2 billion light years away. But I put both of these images on the same spatial scale. So you can see as you go from 12 billion years ago to 2 billion years ago, the galaxies have spread apart. You can see how they're spreading apart. In the image on the left, the galaxies are jammed so tightly together, they're ripping spiral arms off one another. But as we go forward towards the present, the galaxies move apart from one another to such a degree where that phenomena is now quite rare. And incidentally, you can look at all kinds of Hubble Space Telescope images and now James Webb Space Telescope images. What I tell lay people, it's akin to looking at a photo album of your grandfather, where you see your grandfather as a baby in diapers, you see him becoming a toddler. You can literally see your grandfather evolving over his lifetime. We can do the same thing with the universe. We can actually see it from the time that it is born and see it develop as the universe expands towards the present. And 7 times in the Bible it tells us the laws of physics do not change. As I mentioned during the Q&A time, those laws of physics are in place as tools in God's hands to eradicate evil once and for all. And it tells us in Romans 8:23, they will remain in place until the full number of human beings indeed has been redeemed. But one example is Jeremiah 33. Read the whole chapter. God is basically communicating to rebellious Jews and saying, you Jews change your mind all the time, but I'm immutable. I'm a God that never changes. As proof, look to the laws that govern the heavens and the earth. As they never change, I never change. And then Romans 8:20. Let me take it back. That's Jeremiah 23, 33, 25. I have established the fixed laws of heaven and earth. Romans 8, the whole creation groans, subject to its bondage to decay, a reference to what we would call the second law of thermodynamics, or the law of entropy, and what you see throughout the entire book of Ecclesiastes. Everything we see decays, and decay in the universe never stops. It's a pervasive, constant law that exists. And I already gave you this passage. In this world you have tribulation, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Well, I was reading all these passages in my late teenage years and realized if I put two and two together, the Bible is actually declaring we live in a universe that gets colder and colder as it gets older and older. Say, how do you figure that out? Well, you've got a universe with a space-time beginning. The universe expands from that space-time beginning under laws of thermodynamics, a pervasive law of decay. And what does thermodynamics tell us? Any system that expands adiabatically gets colder in proportion to its expansion. Let me give you a simple analogy. Your car engine, most car engines are piston engines. And when the piston chamber compresses, the gasoline gets hot enough to explode. When the piston chamber expands, the temperature goes down and the gasoline stops burning. That's the principle of your car engine. That applies to everything in the universe. So as the universe expands, it gets colder and colder in a highly predictable rate. And frequently when I speak on university campuses to students and professors, I show them this graph. And what you have here is a biblically predicted cooling curve of the universe. And the only assumption I'm making here is I know the age of the universe. If I know the age of the universe, 13.79 billion years, I get this biblically predicted cooling curve of the universe based on those four statements. Space-time beginning, constant laws of physics, it's expanding. One of those laws is a pervasive law of decay. And what you see here are actual measurements we astronomers have made of the past temperature of the universe. These are the two latest measurements. This measurement is the most accurate, and it matches that biblically predicted line with such precision that the error bar is actually smaller than the thickness of that line. Because I was doing one debate on a university campus where the atheist physicist said, I want to see the Bible making a prediction where I can put real numbers and measurements on it. I said, well, this is one example. A biblically predicted curve, and look at the measurements. They perfectly fit the curve. And these error bars we now know are overestimates. The error bars are much smaller. Look how close they are to that biblically predicted line. Today, we know what's most responsible for the expansion of the universe. How many of you have dark energy? Can I see your hands? Dark energy? Okay. You know what's interesting? We didn't even know it existed until 1999. It's a 21st century discovery. Dark energy makes up 70% of all the stuff of the universe. You say, what is this dark energy? Dark energy is the energy embedded in the space surface of the universe. It's got nothing to do with light and heat. It's not electromagnetism. It's energy embedded in the space surface, and the way it operates, as that surface gets bigger and bigger as the universe expands, dark energy becomes progressively more potent in its capacity to accelerate the expansion of the universe. Now, gravity works the opposite way. You all probably remember your junior high physics. Two massive bodies under the law of gravity attract one another. And the closer they are together, the more powerfully they attract. So when the universe is young, the bits and pieces of matter are close together. And so gravity acts as a brake on the cosmic expansion, slowing down the cosmic expansion. Dark energy is the opposite. The bigger the space surface, the more powerful it is to accelerate the expansion of the universe. How it was discovered in 1999? Astronomers measured the past expansion rate of the universe, and they discovered that in the first half of the history of the universe, the expansion rate is slowing down. In the last half, it's speeding up. And so as the universe continued to expand, it tilted in favor of dark energy away from gravity. Now, a question I get asked, especially by older adults, is how much of the expansion of my waistline can I blame on dark energy? The answer is less than 1/4 of an inch per year. Any other expansion's got another cause. Okay, dark energy. But in order to get the galaxies and stars and planets in the universe so that life becomes possible, it's necessary that dark energy be fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 122nd power. That's 122 zeros after the 1. Now, I talked about fine-tuning on Sunday. Many of these fine-tuned characteristics of the universe, we can put numbers on it. But where we have the most spectacular evidence for fine-tuned design is dark energy. Nothing comes close to the fine-tuning that we see in dark energy. In fact, the fine-tuning exceeds the best example of human engineering design by a factor of 10 to the 96 times. The best, most fine-tuned achievement of humanity are the gravity wave telescopes that have just come online and have now made their initial observations. That's the epitome of human engineering design inventiveness. What we see in dark energy is a level of fine-tuning that's 10 to the 96 times greater. Now, this is where we get at the personality of the Creator, because what this is telling us is that the one that designed dark energy to make our existence possible, at a minimum, is a trillion times more intelligent and more knowledgeable than the Caltech and MIT physicists that invented these amazing gravity wave telescopes. And it's at least that many times better funded than the US government, who actually financed the building of these space-time telescopes. And I think you can see where I'm going here. This must be not just a deistic God, but a theistic God, because only a personal being can manifest the attributes of intelligence, knowledge, creativity, and power. What we're seeing is a level of intelligence, knowledge, creativity, and power that's literally trillions and trillions, etc., of times superior to the best that we human beings are capable of manifesting. This is significant because what we're seeing in the personality of the God of the Bible is orders and orders of magnitude more care and power than what we see in the gods that we see manifested in Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, etc. Now we're getting close to the God of the Bible, just based on the fine-tuning argument alone. Now, this has also been acknowledged by theoretical physicists who have been committed atheists all their lives. And I got the paper, so if you want to read the paper for yourself, and it's online, you can read the whole paper for free online. But when these 3 theoretical physicists published their paper about dark energy, that caught the attention of Philip Ball. Philip Ball is a physicist. He's the editor for all the physics articles in the British journal Nature, which today ranks as the most prestigious science journal in all the world. He's an atheist, and so he interviewed these 3. And again, you can read this for yourself free online. I'll be more than happy to give you the link. In fact, I got the link right here. But this is what was published in Nature when Philip Ball interviewed Dyson, Kleban, and Susskind, all publicly committed atheists. They basically said, arranging the cosmos as we think it is arranged, that is, with dark energy, would have required a miracle. And they went on to say in the interview, an unknown agent, namely beyond space and time, intervened in the evolution, that's the history of the universe, for reasons of its own, which explains the title of the paper that they had published, which is Disturbing Implications of a Cosmological Constant, another word for dark energy. They basically said, if indeed dark energy is real, then that means there must be this being beyond space and time that created miracles for reasons of his own. And this is so utterly disturbing that they wound up concluding, this is the last sentence in the research paper, perhaps the only reasonable conclusion is we do not live in a world that is a universe with a true cosmological constant. The conclusion of their paper was dark energy must be wrong, because if dark energy is real, then we've got this God beyond space and time performing miracles for reasons of his own. Now, this paper caught my attention, as you can imagine, and about 9 months later, I wound up writing an article on our reasons.org website, basically saying the great irony of this paper, it only took 9 months for astronomers to come up with 9 independent observational demonstrations that not only is dark energy real, it's the dominant component of the universe. So I wound up writing 9 articles about these discoveries. And for all of you nerds out there, this is where I drew the data from. Galaxy cluster X-ray observations confirmed dark energy. The maps of the cosmic microwave background radiation. And by the way, I'm more than happy to share all these slides with you. They're all public domain. I see some of you frantically trying to take notes, and I'm going through these way too fast for you to take notes. I'm more than happy to give you the slides. So, but these are the 9 different, and you can actually go to this URL. That URL there will actually pop up for you those 9 articles. Not only those 9 articles, we now have 25 independent observational demonstrations that dark energy is real and makes up about 70% of all the stuff of the universe. What does that mean? There's no longer any scientific basis for rejecting theism. There must be this personal God beyond space and time that created the universe for the specific purpose of making a home for us human beings. But dark energy is not the only compelling physical evidence for supernatural personal design. We actually see it in multiple different features of the universe. And back in 1999, our scientific team at Reasons to Believe began to go through the scientific literature and be able to collect these pieces of evidence. And our criteria is this. We would list it if the level of fine-tuned design in that particular feature of the universe was greater than anything that we human beings are capable of manifesting. And here's what we see. Back in 1991, 17 such features of the universe. Every year that went by, the list got bigger and bigger. The list today stands above 200. And if you want to see the documentation, reasons.org/fine-tuning will pop up for you with a 300-page compendium where we list all these features, then we give you links to the scientific research papers where you can check this out for yourself. Now, the 300 pages doesn't just deal with the universe, it deals with other features as well. But it is organized, so you can just look at that. But this demonstrates a principle you see in Job and Psalms. The more we learn about nature, the more evidence we uncover for the supernatural handiwork of God. So literally, just in my lifetime, we've been able to see the list accumulate from a handful down to more than 200, which explains the statements we see by astrophysicists who are agnostics and atheists. In spite of their atheism, agnosticism, they acknowledge, and we look at the universe, we see in the words of Paul Davies, the impression of design is overwhelming. By the way, I've debated him 3 times. It's always been a friendly debate. And you can listen or watch to those online. But even today, he's all the more convinced about this overwhelming evidence for design. Now, this has gotten some rebuttals. I covered this during my Sunday morning message, so I'm just going to go past that. But the whole point is we see fine-tuned design, not just on the level of the universe. We see it at all size scale levels. In fact, we see it all the way down to the fundamental particles. So no matter what size scale you look at, you see overwhelming evidence for design. Literally everything we see in creation, we can make a case for an overwhelming evidence that a God beyond space and time must have designed this. Matter of fact, what I find interesting in the scientific literature, there's been this furious effort to take this anthropic principle, the universe is designed to make a home for humanity. They say, well, it's designed to make possible microbes. And now they're saying it's designed to make possible the building blocks of the building blocks of the building blocks of life molecules. They're trying to demote the anthropic principle, but they're making a point. The level of design is a whole lot less if all you want is microbes. It's a whole lot more if you want plants and animals, and if you want human beings. But the level of design, as I mentioned during my Sunday message, it is at all cosmic levels, and we document this in some detail in the book Design to the Core. And you'll also find a lot in the book The Creator and the Cosmos. So this is all review for you. See how you remember this stuff from Sunday morning, right? Okay, if you need to have it reviewed, Design to the Core. But what I want to share with you is that we've also done something for our galaxy and our planet that we did for the universe, which is basically go through the scientific literature and say, how many features of our Milky Way galaxy and our planet Earth must be fine-tuned to a far greater degree than we humans are capable of. And what this number here represents is the probability that we would find one body in the entire universe that would have the capacity to support microbes. We're not talking humans. Just to get a bacterium on a particular planet or a moon. The probability of that happening without divine miraculous intervention, 1 chance in 10 to the, only 1 chance in 10 to the 31st power. That was 1995. Year 2000, notice the number of discovered features in the scientific literature has risen dramatically. Now the probability is less than 1 chance in 10 to the 144th power. 2006, 1 chance in 10 to the 556th power. Again, if you want to see the documentation, reasons.org/fine-tuning. But if you look at this last column, what it is showing you, again, just what we need for microbes. We're not talking plants and animals or humans. What we notice is that the evidence for supernatural design intervention to make possible the existence of microbes rises by a factor of at least 1,000 times per month. Now, where else can you go in Christian apologetics and get 1,000 times more proof in just a single month? And in most cases, we're talking a factor of 10,000 to 100,000 per month, but conservatively, 1,000 times. And so I frequently will talk to skeptics on university campuses and say, if you're not persuaded today, wait 1 month. And if the evidence goes up by a factor of 1,000 times, you really need to seriously consider the claims that the Bible is making on your life and what you need to do. And as I mentioned, we see dramatically more evidence as we go from simple life to complex life. So for example, we're talking, what does it take to have a planet or a moon where you've got a few microbes that can only exist for 90 days, and then conditions make it impossible? 1 chance in 10 to the 333rd power. But if you want enduring microbes, and what I mean by that, microbes that remain on a planet long enough to chemically transform that planet so you can have plants and animals. Because our planet Earth and all planets begin with a huge quantity of soluble metals, deadly for plants and animals. It's the microbes that chemically transform all these soluble metals into insoluble metals. Well, now the probability is more than a factor of 10 to the 200 times more remote. And if you want animals, you see that, again, you pick up another factor of about 10 to the 200. If you want humans, but the most dramatic figure of all, what kind of fine-tuning do you need for billions of humans to be redeemed from their sin and evil? And this is something, as I mentioned on Sunday, that I've been sharing with my scientist peers who are not yet believers. I say, look, I know you're not yet a believer in Jesus Christ, but if you'll simply do your scientific research from a biblical redemptive perspective, it'll make you a more successful scientist. You're a scientist, put this to the test and see what happens to your career. And of course, my goal is as they become more successful, they'll give credit to the God of the Bible and the Bible message for their success. And a comment from Freeman Dyson. Now, he is a deist. In fact, I think he's evolved to becoming a theist. He has publicly called himself a Christian, but he holds doctrines that are not at all Christian. But he wrote a book called Disturbing the Universe, and he ranks as one of the most best-known physicists in America. But he says, the more I examine the universe, the more evidence I find that the universe in some sense must have known we were coming. Earlier I made the point that in astronomy, we don't see the universe as it is today. We see it as it was, because it takes light time to travel. But what Freeman Dyson's referring to, as we look very far away and very far back in the history of the universe, we see that it's step by step by step is being progressively fine-tuned, designed to make possible the entry of human beings in the extremely narrow time window in which we can exist in the history of the universe. And it says it must have known we were coming, but also must have known that God was intending to redeem billions of human beings. And where I get this from scripturally is Revelation 7:9. John has this vision. Before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language. Well, if you look at Greek mathematics in the first century, they had a number system that went up to 1 billion. So when it says uncountable, the promise is billions of humans are going to be redeemed from their sin and evil. But how do we get explicitly to the redeeming God of the Bible, to Jesus Christ and what he did for us? Well, that comes through asking the question, why would God subject us to so much decay? And again, if you were to take a freshman course in physics, what you get exposed to is that the level of entropy is extremely high everywhere in creation. But where we see the highest measure of decay is in the universe itself. It's the most entropic system we can measure. And because of this very high rate of decay, we human beings experience frustration because everything we do decays. And Rick, I think you can tell us that really is true of Kauai. The rate of decay here in Kauai is exceptionally high, and so you're always having to repair things over and over and over again. But notice that the decay rate is not so high as to completely discourage you from productive work. It's not so high that Rick and his team did not go ahead and build Anchor House, knowing ahead of time it was going to take a lot of work to maintain it, to do what is necessary to take care of the decay that happens. But the other thing we notice is the decay rate is not so low as to let sin go unrestrained. Okay, let me take you back to Genesis chapter 3. Adam and Eve are in the garden. They rebel against God's authority, and God speaks to them and says, because of what you have done, from now on, you're going to experience more work and more pain. So he says to the woman, you're going to experience more pain in childbirth. Now, I believe that she would have experienced pain in childbirth regardless, just because of the anatomy of the human body. But what he is saying is the pain will be increased. And, my wife, what you don't know about me, I'm the smallest man in my family. I've got men in my family that are 6', 7.5". So I'm the shrimp. I'm the only one under 6 feet. And my wife wound up having 2 sons. Each of them was 23.5 inches long. And both of them were over 9 pounds. And they were skinny coming out. And so she went through a lot of pain in childbirth. Because as Rick can tell you, she's only 5'4". And very slim. But what she shared with me years later, she says, the pain of childbirth is not as great as the pain you witness when you watch your children grow up and go their own sinful ways. And every parent goes through that agony. And she says it's something that's not just the women that share, the men share as well. And then God speaks to Adam and says, because of your sin, from now on, you're going to experience more work. He was working before he sinned. But God says, from now on, there'll be more work. And again, it's not just the men that have to work harder. The women have to work harder too. And because of the way God designed the universe, with thermodynamics, gravity, and electromagnetism, the more sin we commit, the more pain we go through to undo the damage that our sin caused, the more work we have to do to undo the damage, and the more time we waste. You get that from the book of Ecclesiastes, to undo the damage. So God has literally designed the laws of physics to motivate us to avoid evil and pursue virtue. If for no other reason, if we don't do that, we're going to experience a lot more pain, a lot more work, a lot more wasted time. We even see that principle in our prison system. Our prison system is designed to reform the prisoners by subjecting them to more work, more wasted time, and more pain. And as I told my sons when they were growing up, if I don't discipline you, the laws of physics will. When they hit their 20s, they said, Dad, the discipline you put us through, yeah, it was painful, there was more work, there was more wasted time. But he says the most painful part of your discipline were all your lectures on the laws of physics. But literally, God designed the universe, the earth and earth's life, for the redemption of billions of human beings, the eradication of evil. And many books have been written on the problem of evil. But the reason why I wrote this book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, I don't know of any other book that addresses the problem of evil in the context of the temporary laws of physics that God has set up. And these laws of physics indeed are temporary. They will disappear, but they will not disappear until God first eradicates all evil and suffering. And the step-by-step process in which he does that, I talk about that in this book, Improbable Planet. And hey, every book that we publish, you can get a free chapter just by going to reasons.org/Ross. The heavens proclaim his righteousness, and all the people see his glory. Hey, I got more time for Q&A this time. And again, good question. You get to have a little treat from that box. So who'd like to be first? Yes.
So I had a question regarding what you said about childbirth with Eden Garden. So I'm curious, I know you said that you're assuming there might have been some pain even before God said that. So my question to you is, how could there be pain in the world without sin in the world?
Okay, notice what you see in Genesis 3. More pain and more work. It's not pain for the first time. It's not work for the first time. It's more pain and more work. And what you see in Genesis 3:17, cursed is the ground because of you. It's not cursed because God changed the laws of physics. Sure. Laws of physics have been there all along. What makes the ground less productive is the fact you've got sinners working the ground. And so they cut corners.
Sure. So before the fall, though, and maybe my timeline's off a little bit here, I need to read, for sure, but you might be able to tell me just right here. In regards to when God's speaking this, is this after the fall already occurred, or is this before Eve ate of the fruit?
Okay, it's important to realize Adam was not the first sinner. The first sinner was Satan.
Sure.
And we don't know when he sinned.
Sure.
He could have sinned before God created the universe. But as I mentioned in my first talk, God knows the future.
Right.
He knew exactly what was going to happen. Therefore, he created the universe with sin and evil and redemption already in mind. He designed it for that purpose, set up the laws of physics that he could immediately use to eradicate evil and suffering.
So would you be willing to say that the Garden of Eden was more the introduction of free will and less the introduction of sin?
Well, God knew that sin would happen. I mean, put this into context. He allowed Satan to come into the Garden of Eden.
Sure.
He could have kept Satan out for all eternity, but he had a reason for allowing Satan to come in. And notice Satan goes to Eve when she's by herself. Adam's not there, God's not there. That was all purposely set up, in my opinion, by God.
Right.
God knew he was going to use this evil that Satan would introduce for a far greater good. Because here he got Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden before they sinned. What did they lack? They did not have eternal security. But by being introduced to sin and evil, now a pathway was set up where we could be permanently delivered from sin and evil while our free will is being enhanced so we can experience even more love and express even greater love. Another option God had, he could have created Adam and Eve with a weak free will so that they would never disobey his instructions.
Sure, which that's a moist robot. I've always liked that.
Yeah, I like that phrase, a moist robot. Because, yeah, you got the robot able to make free will decisions, but not in a very strong way.
Sure.
And when you do that, yes, you're going to get obedience, but you're not going to get strong love. You're going to get weak love. Weak free will means weak love. God wanted strong love. And so for that reason, he gave human beings strong free will and purposely exposed them to Satan, the most powerful and most intelligent. He knew exactly what was going to happen. They were no match for Satan.
Yeah, thank you. It's an insightful perspective.
Okay, and you get one of those. That was a great question. You're next.
So do you think the universe would have existed if sin wasn't a thing?
I do believe God created the universe with sin and evil fully in mind, simply based on the biblical texts that say God began his works of redemption before he created anything. If there was no sin and evil, then redemption wouldn't even be a factor. And redemption is a marvelous way for God to express his love. I mean, what greater love is there than the fact that the creator of the universe did what he did to redeem us human beings from our sin and evil. And also, we get to directly experience the grace of God. What it tells us about the angels, they observe the grace of God. They're mystified by this grace where we get delivered from our sin and evil, which explains why in the new creation we'll be elevated above the angels. They watch the grace of God, we get to directly experience it. Okay, you get one of those too, and then you're next.
Mine's really different. You're talking about how you can take pictures of different moments in time in
Yes,
space.
yes.
That's a completely new thought. So you can take that shows like a certain date and time and then take another picture. And how does that work?
Well, this is something a lot of lay audiences have a hard time grappling with, because they understand how, like, geology works, where you can infer the past. But in astronomy, we don't infer the past, we directly access the past, free of any assumptions. Now, there's a weakness to that. As I share with my wife, look, you can't hold me responsible for the present. I'm an astronomer. I get all my data from the past. So, but the data I get from the past is direct data. We directly access past events, but we don't know what the present universe looks like. On the other hand, we can look at distant galaxies, something I write about in Design to the Core. We can look at a galaxy 10 billion light years away, but because we've got such a detailed understanding of the history of what happens to galaxies as they get older and older, we can predict, based on that image of a galaxy 10 billion light years away, what it looks like today.
So you're not actually taking, that's where I was like, how can you, one picture predict be one thing and take another picture and you see a different.
Now, we got to look at a different object.
Yeah.
So, like for example, I run into Christians who say, well, you astronomers have not actually seen stars being born in real time. And I said, well, in one sense we are, but it's not the same star. We look at millions of stars in different stages of star formation, and we get a complete picture of how stars collapse from a molecular cloud, and then they condense and they ignite nuclear fission, then nuclear fusion. We see all the steps, but you can't see them in a single star. Why? Because it takes about 1 million years for a collapsing gas cloud to actually turn on nuclear fusion. But because we can look at millions of stars, we can see the whole thing.
Might be a silly question, but so you're saying that all these billions of years happened in the universe of outer space and whatnot before the world was even created?
Yeah. Well, for example, there have been papers published where they say all the speculation about intelligent life elsewhere in the universe, we can dismiss it all. Why? Because by looking at the detailed history of the universe, we realize there's a minimum time that's needed to produce a home where humans or the equivalent of humans could possibly exist. And guess what? We humans are here at that minimum time. So they said we might get intelligent life after us, but we can't get it before us. We're here at the bare minimum time. So we're the first on the scene.
It's a completely new thought to think about how there's time before, like, people argue about how old the Earth is, and Christians believe it's not very old, but I've never thought about the beforehand, how long that could possibly be.
Yeah, well, those Christians that argue for a young Earth, what they're not aware of is that in astronomy, we can directly access past events. We can literally see the physics of the universe changing over its whole history. We can see the stars and galaxies changing and realize, for example, it takes 3 generations of stars just to get the elements that are essential for your body to live and survive. So, for example, you need arsenic in your body to survive. You only need a tiny amount. It takes a lot of time for the universe to produce the level of arsenic that you need to live, and silver, molybdenum, and all the others.
But with God, and knowing that we need that stuff, don't you think he could have sped that process up to...
He certainly could have. But if he sped the process up, it would be different physics. And with different physics, you got a less efficient tool to eradicate evil and suffering. His goal is to eradicate the evil. Once he brings humans on the scene, he wants it all over with in thousands of years. Yes, with different laws of physics, you could have life existing in the universe, but now you're looking at millions of years to eradicate evil and suffering. He wanted to do it quickly. That's why he chose gravity. That's why he chose thermodynamics, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear force. And it's those laws of physics that mandate a certain passage of time before you get everything in place to make humans possible. Now, things do come into place much earlier for microbes. But what's also interesting, the first microbes on planet Earth appear at the very earliest time that's possible given the laws of physics. It takes 10 billion years of cosmic history just to get the bacteria existing. But for us, it takes more time. Yeah, but God certainly has other options. You can watch a debate I did with Victor Stenger at the International Skeptic Society conference, because he brought that issue up. Couldn't we do it with different laws of physics? And I said, well, if you're talking about non-physical life beings, yes, you can do it with different laws of physics. I made the point that the Bible actually declares that. We're not the only intelligent species God created. He also created angels. But guess what? They live in a different realm with different dimensions. So yeah, with altered physics, altered dimensions, you can still have life, but it won't be physical life like what we have, where you've got thermodynamics that causes our bodies to decay, but also provides God with a tool to rapidly and efficiently eradicate evil and suffering. And that's the other thing. God wants to eradicate evil with a minimum amount of suffering being imposed upon human beings. And again, I can easily imagine different laws of physics, but now you've got more suffering. Okay. I'll go to you first, then I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
All right, it's a little bit off topic.
You can go off topic with me, by the way.
Cool. So, saying like Earth is like billions, years old, right? And the Garden of Eden and everything was formulated over a pretty long period of time, right? But how were people formulated? How would you say? Because it says God formed man out of the dust of the ground.
Right. Well, I got a special message on this. It's coming, I think, either tomorrow or the next day.
Okay.
But our position at Reasons to Believe is that we live in a young universe that's only billions of years old. There used to be a debate in the early part of the 20th century, is the universe quadrillions of years old or only billions of years old? And the astronomers, and they were in the majority, they were pushing for quadrillions. They said, we need that to save Darwin. If it's only billions, Darwinism is gone. Whatever illusions the biologists have, we astronomers know it can't happen in that short of a time frame. The battle ran on for 50 years. but the young universe creation is one. It's only billions of years old. But I'm aware that within Christianity, there's this debate, is it thousands of years old? And that would be the case for humans. Humans have only been here thousands of years.
So would you say
But the earth and the universe have been here for billions.
So would you say that the creation of humans is more of a miraculous event in that it happened very quickly rather than the
Well, all of them are miraculous events. We're not talking just one or two miracles.
more like very, very quickly compared to the longer process?
Okay. It was Augustine 1,500 years ago who made the case in his books. What we're looking at in Genesis is God instantly creating, instantly miraculously creating, but doing it over long periods of time. So we're talking literally millions of instantaneous creation miracles. But they don't all happen within 144 hours. They happen over an extended period of time. And I believe, you see God saying in Genesis 1, it was good, it was good, it was very good. He's enjoying what he creates. I come from a family of artists. I'm the lone scientist in the family. And all the artists in my family, when they're really working on a masterpiece that really is the best of their work, they purposely take extra time to create it because of how much enjoyment they're having when they're creating it. But as an astrophysicist, I can tell you, God is actually doing it as rapidly as possible, given the laws of physics he chose. He could have taken trillions of years, but he did it as fast as possible. So he's actually in a real hurry to get this conquest of evil and suffering done, so that he can take us into the new creation. So I see it as a speedy creation, again, in the context of the laws of physics.
So you would say that when God's, when God's creating in our dimension, that he's subject to the laws of our dimension?
He's not subject to our laws. He created the laws. It's what I said earlier this morning. He is simultaneously immanent and transcendent. That's a doctrine that's unique to Christianity. You don't see that in any other religion, which means he's intimately involved with his creation. I mean, a sparrow falls, he knows about it. He knows when someone steps on an ant. He's very intimately involved in his creation, but in no way is he subject to his creation. He has the power to do anything he wants beyond space, time, matter, and energy. It's lunchtime.
Say goodbye again.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Okay.
Time? We
no,
can always
it-
have it later if you want.
Yeah, it's lunchtime, but I'll take your question, and I'll take yours too. One simple question? Okay.
Is that new creation, is that going to be his masterpiece that he's going to take a long time to do?
Okay, good question. When we read Genesis 1, he says, it's good, it's very good. It never says it's perfect. The perfect ultimate creation is the new creation. That's the creation that is the ultimate, where there's no sin and evil. Love is going to be magnified far greater than anything we've experienced here. I mean, just think of the most loving relationships that humans have ever had here. That's going to be exponentially expanded in the new creation. And I can share with you at lunch and other times. I've written a book on what life will be like in the new creation. You're literally going to be able to have simultaneous, ultimately intimate, loving relationships with billions of angels and humans simultaneously. God's going to deliver us from experiencing relationships in just one dimension at a time. And you say, why did God put us in just one dimension at a time now? With a single dimension at a time, and with sin, evil runs out of control. The fact that he constrained us to one time dimension actually limits the expression of evil. So that's why we're constrained to one time dimension now. In the new creation, there's going to be no families, there's going to be no marriages. None of that is necessary anymore, because we're going to be delivered into geometric time. We'll no longer be constrained to linear time. I've written 2 books on that, Beyond the Cosmos and Why the Universe is the Way it is. Oh, last question.
I can say after if you want, or either way.
Well, if it's short, let's go for it.
I don't know how short it is. So it's in regards, obviously, to the creation account. The place with old Earth creation that I get a little bit leery with God is outside of the natural order. He's not limited by the same type of things that we are. He's not limited by time. He's not limited by elements. He's not limited by matter. He can do whatever he wants. So that's where, with some of the language and some of the description and other ways, other places in Scripture to reference the creation account, that's where I feel like it kind of gets into what came first, the chicken or the egg with creation. And just through God's characteristics and through how God goes about some of the miraculous things he does, he definitely does things in conclusion. He does things in completion. And that being said, I don't know, and there's a few verses where you get, Genesis 1 through 3, obviously he doesn't give us any account of what time, who knows how long he was hovering over the water, you know what I mean? Stuff like that we won't know until we ask him someday. But when he does get down lower and starts getting more descriptive in different manners, which one of them is day, which I know day in Hebrew is not a 24-hour period. I know that can refer to a long time. And in Scripture, you see day used as like the day of Abraham, which is a very long period of time. But then he goes into even more detail, where he goes into morning and evening, and those being translated then in Hebrew the same way are very specific accounts, very specific time periods, and it's a very descriptive type of way of explaining it. And the other thing that I think also reaffirms it is God repeats himself several times. And every time God repeats himself in Scripture, usually does it to get his point across. So that's the other thing. Just a few of the evidences of why I believe.
Well, I got a whole talk on this, but I'll briefly all the points you've made. Okay, the repetition you see in Genesis chapter 1 affirms the chronology of the text. I've just finished a book where I'm basically taking on these theologians who say there's no chronology in Genesis 1. Well, the days are numbered. That's a clear evidence of chronology. And also when God repeats himself, that's also evidence of chronology. And in the non-chronological creation text, you don't see any of that repetition. It's unique to Genesis 1, where he says, and it was so, and it was so, it was good, and the numbered days. It's like Moses is going overboard to communicate to all readers, including those of us in the 21st century, this is an historical chronology. But I can share with you, there's a huge debate going on in seminary campuses where they're rejecting the chronology of Genesis 1, primarily because they think there's an overwhelming case for biological evolution by naturalistic means. You're going to hear a lecture where I take that on.
Yeah, so...
but let me finish, okay. The evening morning, and I never went to church until several years after I became a Christian. It's hard to find Bible-believing churches in Canada. So, but in reading the text, I notice you've got this evening morning phrase after the first 6 days. And what I now know from biblical Hebrew, the Hebrew words for evening and morning more frequently are translated beginning and ending. And even if you just stick with the evening morning, it's clearly referring to the close of a day and the beginning of a day. It's basically telling us another affirmation of chronology. Creation day 1 had a definite start time and a definite end time. Same thing for creation day 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6. This is affirming the historical chronology. Again, it's like God anticipated there would be this 21st century debate on seminary campuses. So he gave us the tools. But when you get to creation day 7, there's no evening morning phrase. And you see 2 places in the Bible, Psalm 95 and Hebrews 4, which tell us we're still in God's 7th day. The reason there's no evening morning phrase, we're still in the 7th day. Now, part of my story is my parents were worried I was getting obsessive about physics and astronomy. That's all I was reading from the age of 7 onwards, besides my school stuff. And so at age 11, they bought our family a big, thick book on evolutionary biology. Because they said, if we're going to get Hugh reading something besides physics and astronomy, it's got to be science. I was the only one in the family that read the book. But I went to my parents and said, Mom, Dad, the numbers don't add up. What we see before humanity is the appearance of all these phyla and classes and orders of life. After humanity, none of that happens. And so they said, go ask your science teachers. My science teacher says, go ask those science professors you know at the university. Nobody could give me an answer. But when I first picked up the Bible and read Genesis 1, I said, this answers the fossil record enigma. For 6 days God creates. On the 7th day, he stops creating. The reason we don't see it now, God has stopped creating. It also explains why so many biologists say we see no evidence for God. They're looking on the wrong day. If they're looking in the human era, all you see is natural process. There is no evidence for supernatural intervention. The Bible explains why. God has stopped doing that. Now, the Bible is also clear. He's not ceasing from all work. He stops his work of creation to target his work of redemption. The 7th day is the day of redemption. The first 6 days are the days of creation. But when I saw that at age 17, this answers the fossil record enigma. Again, it was a big clue. This is inspired by God. It's the only book that got it right. Also explains why so many astronomers are Christians, because almost all their data comes from the 6 days, not the 7th day. And so, and you see that throughout all the sciences. In the physical sciences, a huge number of believers. In the life sciences, not so many. Social sciences, we're talking 1 or 2% only. But we can go into this in more detail later.
Absolutely, no worries.
Okay, lunchtime.